and then to turn it into corporate personhood, that a corporation, it has a protection of the First Amendment speech, and anonymously can give money, is disaster.
Well, I think that's connected to civility after I said we aren't going to talk policy. But I think your words are very wise, because one of the concerns that I think everyone has is what has the amount of money that goes into politics done to affect our civil discourse. Governor Sullivan?
I think it deals with civility. Part of civility, part of democracy is transparency. And when you can start pulling the strings on democracy without accountability, that's problematic.
That's problematic. Well, Senator Simpson, we've had an opportunity to talk a little bit before tonight, and I'm curious as to whether you think that the problems that we're seeing, the civility or lack thereof, are brand new to our country, or whether they have been around for a long time.
Been around for a long time. And if you read your history, look at Lincoln's race. He was, if you go to the Springfield Museum in Illinois, the Lincoln Museum, you see the cartoons they did of Abe Lincoln. They don't match anything today about Trump or Hillary. They really don't. Pictures of him with black people, loving black people, little fans that you could get into the theater, and you open it up and here's a little black person picks up through the fan. Called him melancholy, constipated, sick, morose, distressed, depressed. Pretty tough stuff. And that was part of he was complex enough a man to recognize the wonder of his own simplicity. But he also took a load of crap that people don't even understand. My father ran for the U.S. Senate in 1940, a Republican against Joseph C. O'Malley, who was the longest-serving Democrat, and they turned his car over in Rock Springs one night during the rally. That's the way it used to work. Really not too good. I mean, that has happened, and then on the floor of the Senate, one fellow called the other one a rancid tub of lard. Also caned another guy. I mean, it's been going on. But now, if the old man's car was turned over today, it would be on BBC. But then it was just in the Rock Springs Minor. And that's part of the problem of the world today.
Yeah.
24/7 stuff is bizarre. Turn off your set or you'll go crazy. Well, enough of that.
Here. Governor Sullivan?
Well, I would second the motion. I'm thinking of two things. One, you talk about Lincoln and all of the issues there. First, he was one of the most civil of presidents. Ultimately, without his civility, we wouldn't have been able to put ourselves back together after the war. And he understood that power didn't mean you took advantage of it. And one of the issues that I see, and Al and I have talked about it before, and you're all familiar with it. The Democrats are in power in Washington. We're talking about Washington now, and they do certain things to provoke the other side. And then all of a sudden the Republicans get in power, and you'd think, having been provoked, maybe they'd recognize how wrongful that is to the system and try to be better. But no, it provokes a higher provocation. So you're escalating each time, and it's difficult for those folks back there to handle power. And I think if you looked at Lincoln, you could find out that there was a better way to handle it. The second point, just imagine if there were 24-hour news in Lincoln's time, what this would look like. or even in Millward Simpson's time when he got his car turned over. It would be all over. It would be outrageous. And the people who were giving money anonymously would be paying people to go out and do more of it. And where does that put us?
Well, sometimes we think of sort of the good old days with a nostalgic feeling that it wasn't as bad then as it is now. And I think it's going to be kind of fun for us to take Senator Simpson back about 30 years to when he and Senator Ted Kennedy had a radio show. Some of you may have been exposed to it, called Face Off. And I don't know how long you did this.
8 years
8
we
years.
did that.
And that was weekly.
5 days a week?
And I think it was weekly that it aired, wasn't it?
It was once a day, 5 days a week, and we're Armed Forces Radio and about 397 mutual radio stations called Face Off.
All over the
2
country.
minutes each, get to whack on each other.
Well, we get to hear whack 'em.
How the hell do you get any work done?
That's a terrible.
We're going to get to listen to a little piece of history and talk about maybe how that compares to what we hear today, if we can cue that Face Off.
This is Ted Kennedy. The White House needs a wake-up call about the nation's healthcare system. In a moment, Senator Al Simpson and I will face off. Al, the Bush administration's do-nothing attitude is blocking action on many domestic challenges, but their refusal to deal with the healthcare crisis is a national embarrassment, maybe even an international embarrassment. 34 million Americans have no health insurance. 60 million more have insurance that even the Reagan administration admitted was inadequate. Every year, costs increase for working families, and coverage is reduced because medical bills are out of sight. The Democrats have a reform even you can support, Al, since you have nothing of your own. It imposes strict controls on costs and requires all employers to insure their workers, or else pay into a public fund for comparable coverage. Think hard, Al. There was President Bush at the Economic Summit in London. All the other G7 nations have sensible health care plans to protect their citizens. Why not the USA?
Ted, the other 6 countries are going broke paying for it. You and your family might have something left over after paying 70% of your income in taxes just for socialized medicine, but most folks will just be plain broke. The majority of Americans now work 3 to 4 months just to pay their taxes. Imagine what it would be like to live in a socialist nation and work 7 or 8 months a year just to give the government their cut. Ted, your grand and goofy Democrat health insurance plan ups taxes on business so drastically that most companies will go bankrupt. Worry about health insurance, they won't even have a job. Maybe that's the solution to you, but I'd rather see us looking for ways to cut income tax rates so people can afford insurance instead of working toward a collective goal of making our citizens fiscal slaves of the state. Ted, your comrades on this one are all overseas. Why not join them?
You were having way too much fun there,
Well,
weren't you?
we did have fun. I mean, really, because I'd whack him, and we'd see each other on the floor, and he'd say, you know, you went overboard. You really did. I didn't like that. I said, well, you stuck it to me last week, so enjoy it. And we worked together on a lot of things. We worked on immigration, we worked on health care, we worked on a lot of things, and I didn't agree with his lifestyle. That's not me to judge. I'm not in the judgment game. Nobody appointed me God. And so we worked together. The only thing I cared about with Ted Kennedy is when he shook my hand, did he keep his word? And he never violated his word with me, either for me or against me.
Did you have a relationship like that, Governor Sullivan?
I had no relationship like that. But a lot of relationships that were not dissimilar, and Al just said, those kind of relationships and the kind of relationships that you have to develop and are more difficult these days, I think, are relationships built on trust and on respect. And if you don't have trust and respect, you end up with the polarization that we see. When I was in office, as I think you pointed out, I had a Republican majority in the legislature for all 8 years that I served. And I've always contended that you were better off governing a state with a legislature of the other faith, as Al says, because that generates a constructive tension between the executive and the legislative branch, which can play off of each other and work toward compromise, if you will, and better solutions. If you have all the power in both the executive and the legislative of the same, you end up with internal battles that really aren't battles that can be aired very well publicly. And it's strictly, instead of a battle of two views necessarily, it's a battle of who's got the better power, the legislative or the executive. If it's different parties, there's expected to be the tension, and it's, in my view, more constructive than destructive.
Well, and of course, when you're operating in Wyoming and it's a small state,
Yeah,
a
and then there's
small
Wyoming.
environment.
You have to just get used to not having any power in the executive.
Exactly. But you knew those people personally, and you saw those people on weekends and spent your family time probably with those people. I think that had to help.
I think we would share this view that, as I said earlier to you, Marilyn, the best part about Wyoming is there aren't very many people. The worst part about Wyoming is there aren't very many people. So both politically and personally, there's a much closer connection and an expectation for a much closer connection. We're expected to have the town meetings, expected to get out and understand the communities and the people. And that adopts one of Al's friends, Jim Baker, who's one of the quintessential politicians in my view, used to say, in politics, you never burn any bridges because you may have to cross back over them the next day. And in Wyoming, that's in spades. Because not only might you have to cross back over the bridge, you might turn the corner and there they are. And we're very close. But I think that's a position that too many have forgotten. And they burn bridges, and then it becomes more polarization and less discussion, maybe no discussion.
Senator Simpson, I hear it said that they operate differently in Washington now because people don't spend time, they don't live there, they go back and forth to their home state, they don't develop the relationships that you developed with Senator Kennedy, who I think you said you became close to his family and spent time with him and his family. Do you think that adds to the lack of civility that we then see?
Well, yeah, the real one was that in the election of '78, there were 20 new senators. 1/5 of the U.S. Senate was rotating, which had never happened. I think it was the only historical time that 1/5 of the Senate was new. There were 11 Republicans or 9 Democrats or vice versa. We became very close. Bill Bradley, Bill Cohen, Nancy Kassebaum, David Pryor, I could name the whole batch. And we used to meet once a month. And Byrd was the majority leader, Robert Byrd. We called him Robert, we didn't call him Bob. Robert Byrd. And Howard Baker. And after about 3 months, they came to one of our meetings. They said, "What are you doing here?" Well, the Democrats invite a speaker once a month, and then the Republicans appoint one, and they said, "Yes, but that's not normal." And we said, "Well, what do you talk about?" He'd ask, "What do we talk about?" We say, "Well, how to answer the mail is one thing we talk about. We're not into mysterious things." Well, it lasted about 6 months because all of us got busy in our committees. But we were very close. We'd often call each other and say, "Let's have hamburgers." And we'd go over to Bradley's house or Thad Cochran or Carl Levin or John Warner. Those were the people in that class. Boy, that's long gone because they're being told by their committee chairman, the Democrat committee, Senate committee, and the Republicans, guess what you're going to do today? Here's a Rolodex, and you're going over off campus, and you're going to make phone calls all day for money.
Oh.
and that's what you do. Meanwhile, the legislation just stacks up. Nobody has the time to pay attention to it, to do the homework. It's a mess, a total mess.
Well, it does make you a little nostalgic for the old days, doesn't it, when you hear it described that way. But it does seem like the bonds between people are part of what encourages civility. You're much more likely to be civil to someone that you have a relationship with.
Very much so. I remember when I did the immigration bill, major one. It was signed by Reagan in '86. It was a sweeping piece of legislation, but in the last night at the House, they took the guts out of it, which was a more secure identifier system, like a slide card or something. And the guy gave a talk on the floor of the House. He said, "Do you realize what Simpson's up to? This is a national ID card." That was the end of that section. They jerked that section out, so the bill passed. 3 million people came forth out of the dark that had been here long, long years. And I was very proud of that fact. And they came from 93 different nations, not Mexico. And that was a good thing, and we did that. But in the course of it, it was a bill without guts, because you couldn't have a more secure identifier, and the employer said, "I'm not going to go to jail. How do I knowingly employ?" So that was, you watch those things, you don't go home and suck your thumb, you just move on. But you have to be ready for a lot of disappointment. You can't get too high, can't get too low.
Well, that's always good advice. I guess I watch the two of you, and you both use humor so effectively, and it almost seems, I remember, I'm sure you both do, the advertisement that Senator Wallop had when he ran for office with the porta potty hooked onto a pack horse, and he was complaining about government regulation, and it won some big award, I don't know, but it was really funny to watch. I don't know about you, but I haven't seen a funny political ad in a long time. And so I'm sort of interested as to how the two of you use humor, and then also maybe when humor slides into sarcasm, and does that counterproductive when we're talking about civility? Governor Stiller?
Well, Al's the master, and always has been, with humor.
How'd you spell that?
But I use it out of self-preservation, I think, more than anything else, because I can't imagine one life, and certainly not political life, without having fun. Because if you're not having fun, and you're just there full of meanness and sarcasm, then there's something wrong up here and something wrong down here, because you cannot deal with the difficult issues in any political job. And I think Al and I would agree, you go to the school board, or go to the county commissioners, that's where you get really close to the people and really close to the issues. And if you can't deal with that with humor, I don't know how you could hold the job. You can't use it. It's a serious business, but you have to get enjoyment out of it. And I get enjoyment out of just listening to Simpson. But I've heard all of his jokes at least 20 times.
You've told them too.
I have.
But his mother, Margaret, I knew her, and my mother, Lorna, both would tell their little boys that humor is the universal solvent against the abrasive elements of life. That's what it is. That's what humor is. And another thing you never, ever want to forget, all humor comes from pain. Anyone with a great sense of humor, Danny Kaye, I knew Danny Kaye. Remember, he was here at the Grand Teton Music Festival once, conducting and throwing his baton. And I had a good visit with him, knew him before. He said, all humor comes from pain. And that's not, I go too further with it, but for me, I was a big, lard-butted, knock-kneed kid with zits all over me. And man, I had to learn humor so I could out-talk the guy or outrun him. I couldn't do that, so I had to use humor to keep him pounded. It was right on this spot in the grade school, and my brother and I, in 1940, wore Wilkie buttons and got our butts torn to shreds in this town. The Roosevelt kid said, "You guys are for Wilkie, he's an idiot." Pow. So we do learn humor, and I just laughed, said, "We don't like Wilkie either." Yeah. But no, I didn't do that. But if you don't have humor, politics is barbaric. It is totally barbaric, and unless you have the softening agents of life, fortunately we have a girl from Powell and a girl from Grable that kind of center us, and there's Ann and Jane right there.
Yes.
And so you have to have theater and art and music and books and things and walking in Jackson Hole or living here, beauty and smelling the air, and except for smoke, and but you got to have the softening agents of life. And I see guys who are young, and they'll come up, that Mike has too, come in to see us, and they're 18 and they say, "I want to be a U.S. Senator someday." I say, "It's a great idea, but if you feel that way right now, or 20 or 25, you're going to start giving away pieces of yourself to please the people, hoping you can kiss up to them so that they'll be with you when you decide on the great adventure. And by the time you get there, all of your pieces will have left nothing but you as a husk. Just go succeed in something else first, whatever it is." And then people say, "I think I'd vote for that guy. He was a good electrician, or he was a good lawyer, or whatever the hell he was," instead of waiting in the wings, seething to be in politics.
That's
I
how
don't believe
you do
that's
it.
been properly recorded. My mother told me to quit making faces. Enough. Okay,
That's
so-
the face that kept getting in the press.
Well, it's certainly a lot harder to be uncivil to that face, right? Well, I wonder if either of you think there was a point in time, and I think Senator Simpson, you made reference to the corporate funding of politics. Maybe that is one point in time, but that you could pinpoint as when things might have changed and shifted a little bit. It helps maybe for us if we think we really want to try to restore civility to understand what caused it to get off the tracks.
Well, I saw what caused it, at least in my view, being in the Senate, coming in with a good bipartisan group of friends. We enjoyed each other. And that was when the Republicans, who had been in the minority for 40 years in the U.S. House, finally even the slaves don't just get tired, the masters get tired of beating the slaves. And so these guys would say, "I tell you, I've had it here." And you can imagine the pain of having an amendment as a Republican, this is partisan at this point, and giving it to the chairman of the committee, and the staff member would pick it up and say, "This is a great amendment," and the chairman will take it. He'll put this in under his own name. "Too bad about you, you'll have to do a new press release." So those guys eventually thought there's a way out, go to the Senate. And they came, both parties, and they brought the venom with them. Like, they stiffed us for 40 years, and now we got back. Newt came back, and then, the other one who resigned, Jim, I can't recall. It was a tough time. Newt made a promise to do something in 100 days, an admirable thing, did it, but in doing it, had to stamp out, and then the Democrats would do something and have to stamp out the other ones. But they worked themselves into the Senate, and then you'd see all of a sudden they'd say, "Well, don't vote for that, that's a Democrat amendment." And I said, who the hell cares? Does it work in the legislation? "Oh, no, Al, that guy, that's who that is." I really learned it in the commission. I was appointed by the president to say, oh, you must be a toady. You know, Obama appointed you, you sucker. You're just a sucker for Obama. What kind of a bonehead are you? I said, look, he's the president of the United States. I don't agree with him at all. But he appointed me and Erskine, and we worked for a year. And we came up with 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 1 independent, and did a 67-page report, which is about as bipartisan as you can get. The president ran for the exit, so did the Republican and the Democrats. And people say, well, who was on the commission? Well, let's see, who voted for that? And I said, well, Dick Durbin, that commie from Illinois, for the God's sake. Well, yes, but Tom Coburn, that Neanderthal Republican from Oklahoma, that's your country. People in this audience who hate Hillary. There are people in this audience who hate Trump. They don't dislike them, they hate them. And hatred corrodes the container it's carried in. And that's where your country is right now.
Oh, boy. Well, that is certainly a startling thought, but it's probably an accurate one. And I don't know, Governor Sullivan, do you think that there was a point in time from your observation when things did shift, like the senator described?
How do you follow that? You will.
Tough. It's tough.
There certainly isn't a time, and I'm happy to say that I hope we haven't reached that Washington point in Wyoming. Although we've got to be concerned because there's a lot of money going even into the legislature that we can't follow. We don't know who's making the contributions, and yet we know that they're making it to establish a constituency that follows rigid lines, and that's of concern. I continue to go back to 24-hour news changed it, money in politics changed it. The general polarization, and in part it started with this deepening escalation of the Congress. And you get to a point, when you get to a point that when Governor Christie greets the president in the middle of a crisis in his state, and whether he shook his hand or embraced him, I don't remember which, and then gets castigated by his own party for being an Obama lover, we've gone too far, because you cannot solve the community's problems with a rigid ideology. We just won't get there. And we've seen that in other instances, as you've pointed out in Congress. Well, that's a Democratic amendment. We can't do that. As a result, we're doing nothing. We're not getting the difficult problems resolved. And that's, I blame both sides. This is not a partisan comment.
Well, you touched on it a little bit, Senator Simpson, but I'm wondering if you can think of your own campaigns, and I'll ask Governor Sullivan the same question. Was there a time that you can recall where you were either attacked or had some need to come back hard at somebody, and the desire to be civil, or your natural personality to be civil, might have overcome your desire to strike back? Or is there can you think about how it personally affected you in any of your campaigns?
Yeah, the toughest thing to learn is you are entitled to be called a fool, boob, idiot, bonehead, 4-letter words. All the rest of that is fair in politics. But never let them distort who you are. And if you're doing immigration and you get called a bigot, you say, wait a minute, pal, you just stepped over the line there. Really, you don't know what you're talking. Or I chaired the Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm a veteran. I made a crack. I said, you know, you mean we got to give the same benefit to a guy who served 6 months and never left Camp Beetle Bailey and doesn't know a mortar tube for either end, and he gets the same benefit as a combat veteran? I said, not on my watch. Oh, you'd really be popular doing that. Only 4% of us veterans have ever heard a live shot go past our head, fired by an enemy. Remember that? It's a wonderful 4%, but the other 94% of us weren't there, even in the theater. So, enough of that. When somebody distorts who I am, let me tell you, an attack unanswered is an attack believed. Furthermore, take it another notch. An attack agreed to is an attack. Attack unanswered is an attack agreed to. I've seen my pals go down on the basis of nobody will believe that. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, they will believe anything. And it will be fueled by the right and the left to believe, make you believe. So the people, this is the toughest part of politics, the people who are telling you not to respond are the people who love you the most. Your wife, your brother, your mother, your father. Don't respond, Al. You don't want to get down on their level, do you? And I'd say, watch this. And that doesn't have anything to do with civility. It has to do with reality. If the perception of all politicians that they're just a horny bunch of corrupt adulterers, then you want to do something about that, especially if you're not in that game. So I would do that, and I would hammer them. And say, God, Simpson's thin-skinned. I said, yeah, he is. He really is, because you're not going to change who he is and go to his core and make him different than he is. And I never lost an election. And I took them on. And that's the way it works. No, but you can get in awfully deep trouble on social issues. You just have to state your case and move on. You don't have people agree with you, but boy, oh boy. And you'll know, I want to tell you about this guy. Listen to this. He would grab me and throw me over the edge. He was a governor with Bill Clinton. They were governors of Arkansas and Wyoming. They were friends. I know Bill Clinton. He worked and helped Erskine and I on this proposal, very much so. So Mike is called by Clinton in New Hampshire, and he said, I'm in deep crap up here. Will you come and help me? In the middle of the night, Mike knew that that really wasn't the nicest thing to be thinking about in Wyoming. And he went out of loyalty and friendship. And somebody took a picture of Mike with Clinton. And when Mike ran for the U.S. Senate, he was one of the most popular governors we'd ever had. The ad was a simple, full page. Is this what we want to do, to send Mike Sullivan to be out there with Bill Clinton? Took him down.
One of those pinko communists can tell him what to do.
Yeah.
No, that wasn't in the ad.
No, but
That's what they were saying.
That's loyalty. And loyalty is the most priceless thing in political life. Loyalty and trust. And they're both, the coin of the realm of those two is severely tarnished. But you talk about guts, and there it was. And he never said a word. He didn't say, well, where'd they get the picture, none of that. I like that. I think that's terrific.
Well, I was going to ask you for your personal
What was
experience, Governor Sullivan. You've been upstate.
Don't tell the fact I shot cows. No, we never we didn't kill anything, we just destroyed things. I don't know.
Well, I'd make a couple of points. One is, one of the problems with politics and campaigns and politicians is you've got a whole cadre of people back there telling you what you should be doing. And you have to sort of sort through that, because if you don't, you find yourself out there being somebody who you really aren't. And once you become somebody who you aren't, it's pretty apparent to anybody that knows you. And I remember, I'm proud of the fact that my first campaign in 1986 was against Al's brother, Pete.
Well, I've never forgotten.
Wonderful, wonderful man. And we were friends when we went in, as we were, even though it was a little difficult during that time. And we came out better friends. My second campaign was Mary Mead, here. And we were friends when we went in. And we danced together at the Centennial Ball up on the hill, and we came out better friends than we went in. And that's because you have to stay where you are. And I recall one, and I don't mean to, as Al says, self-aggrandizement, but during the first campaign, I was sitting in the office, and two of my two chief campaign employees came in with two new radio ads. And they said, we've just done these ads, we want you to hear them. And I listened to them, and I said, no, they're demeaning to Pete Simpson. That's not fair. We can't do them. He said, but you got to do them. I said, why do I have to do them? You've got to do them or you won't get elected. And I said, well, look, not getting elected isn't the end of the world. I came into this hoping to get elected, but I didn't have a fire in the belly that said I was going to be a failure if I wasn't elected. And if this makes a difference between getting elected or not getting elected, that's fine. You're not running those ads. And it's too easy to lose yourself in the heat of a campaign. And we see it, I think we see it again and again. And it's hard to control. And there are people out there giving you money and saying you got to do this, or advising you, you've got to do this. But if you lose who you are, you've lost everything that you've done in your life. And it should never be that important.
I think there's probably a fine line between what if a topic is fair game or not fair game, if it's relevant to the campaign, if it's not, and maybe that's a difficult line to draw. But when you're responding, as you described, Senator Simpson, to a claim that is fair game, and I want to have us play a clip from our most recent primary campaign involving Liz Cheney and Leland Christensen, and we're showing this not as a criticism at all of the nature of what they said, but just to give us a basis to sort of talk from about what is fair game and how it ought to be handled. So if we could have that clip.
My competitor tonight, when you look back, is using the Clinton playbook to come into a state on short notice, saying I'm not moving back to Wyoming to run for office, and then turn around and run for office. That's not the way we do things in Wyoming. Let's look at who's been here, who's served here, and who has that track record for good performance, honor, and integrity, has served as a soldier, has served as a law enforcement officer, and will serve you every day in our capital.
I agree with what Leland's saying, that we ought to look at the records of the people on stage. I'd say, first of all, people who've been in the state legislature now for many years have got to explain to the people of Wyoming, how is it we're at a crisis moment? If they've been doing so much and working so effectively, we're at a crisis moment. And I'm sure Leland doesn't want you to look too closely at his record. He'd rather mudsling. Because when you look closely, you find out Planned Parenthood has praised Leland Christensen for votes that were pro-abortion in the Wyoming State Legislature. You'll find out that Leland Christensen, in fact, has been praised by an affiliate of a radical environmental group, a group that, in fact, supports the Clean Power Plan, a group that supports the moratorium on coal leases on federal lands.
So I want the two of you just to react to that interchange in terms of what we've been talking about. Is that what you normally would see? Is that something you would advise? I mean, I don't want to really put you on the spot, but Would that have been the way you handled the interchange? Senator Simpson?
Well,
Go right ahead.
Sounded like beanbag. No, I mean, that's all fair.
It's all fair.
There's nothing unfair about that. They're talking about facts. If the facts were wrong, then it's unfair. But I think the facts on both sides, I don't know, do you think, I don't know all about Christensen. I think he's very reputable, very fine man from here. But I don't, you know, it's when they're distorting who you are, and that wasn't doing that. So I don't know, maybe I was in the wrong game, but I sure enjoyed doing it.
Governor, what do you think?
I think the word mudslinging is used much too freely in campaigns when the press wants to highlight that something's going on. They say, well, there was this big mudslinging battle, and that gets people's attention. And oftentimes, in my view, it's not mudslinging if you're talking about what are real issues and real positions. What is mudslinging if you're talking about issues and positions that are distorted? And I don't know enough about Leland's record to know whether that was distorted or not, but I'm sure there's an explanation for whatever he did. I don't know whether Liz said, I'm moving back, but I'm not moving back to run for office. But that is it's an issue in the campaign, and as long as the facts are right, I don't view it as mudslinging.
Fair game. Well, I'd like you both to reflect on your own experiences that we talked a little bit about, yours with the Irish Peace Accords and yours with the Simpson Bowl Economic Summit assignment that you had. Because I think we really could learn from, I know that didn't get enacted, but you got a successful recommendation out of a bipartisan group, and obviously you were participated in the results in Ireland that were ultimately effective. So something in those two processes worked, and I wonder if you can enlighten us a little bit about how civility might have been involved in why those two efforts were successful. Senator Simpson?
Well, we worked for several months, so we were appointed in early January or February of 2010, and we turned in our report December 1st of 2010 with the 67-page report in English with words in it like going broke and shared sacrifice and how to make the Social Security system solvent. And you know how you do that? You raise the retirement age to 68 by the year 2050. And the AARP said, how will old people ever be able to? Let me tell you, if you're giving to the AARP, you need to send it to this group here or somebody. And the senior citizens group tore us apart. The defense budget, oh, you can't, you touch the defense, what kind of people are you? Well, ladies and gentlemen, there are 64 Department of Defense schools in America still right next to a public school. They all have superintendents, principals, and they cost $54 billion a year. You want to do that, something with that? You ought to. Then, if I'd stayed in another 8 years, I'd have been a military retiree. And I'd have been on TRICARE. The premium is $540 a year and $6 co-payment, and it costs $54 billion a year, and they can't fuel the Harry Truman in the Gulf or give a hot breakfast in Afghanistan. This is what we did, and it pissed off everybody in America. But somebody has to do that. And unless you get in, no. So this plan now is like a stink bomb in a garden party. It lays out there, and there's nothing they can do about it. And our healthcare system is the most expensive in the world, and the quality of it is 25th. And I'm not talking about the nastiness of Obamacare. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the cost of the system. And I'm not talking about the tax code where 20% of the American people use 80% of the stuff in the tax code. Who are they? Let's all, most of us, get our hands in the air, like mine. Madness. Medicare Part B, you pay 35% of the premium, and the guys in the kitchen are paying the other 65. Is that America?
Well, how did you get?
Have a heart operation for 300 grand and be on Medicare, and you could buy the whole town and you don't even get a bill. Give me a break.
How did you get that commission to
Well, because
set
we
those
all
things
had a
aside?
brain and we knew what the kind of, and we knew that we would have to fight through emotion, fear, guilt, and racism. This is the way you pass or kill a bill in Washington. You use a blend of emotion, fear, guilt, or racism to either pass or kill. So we were fully aware that the realtors would say, "You're going to get rid of the home mortgage interest deduction." Oh, for God. No, we're not. We're going to give a 12.5% non-refundable tax credit, which will help the little guy. Well, I don't know if it will or not. Well, we won't take care of your second home on the beach in Alabama, but we'll try to do the best we can. Well, how about the municipal bond interest? That'd be the end of all cities, wouldn't it? Well, we don't think so. But anyway, gang, just remember it's a milk cow with 330 million tits.
So was it unanimous? Was that
No,
report
but
adopted unanimously?
we had to get 18 people to
Okay.
vote for it to get it to the floor, but we got 11. We got
11.
a supermajority, 5
Okay.
Democrats, 5 Republicans, 1 independent, to vote for a package which really was intended to irritate every single person in the United States. And it worked. And,
So there's the answer to civility, right?
you have to.
But you got some compromise. You weren't in favor of
the
every
whole
one of
thing
those
was
provisions.
compromised. There was a wonderful man, Javier Becerra. He's a member of the leadership of the Democratic Party. He had a tough time with that vote, and I'd known him for years. And I said, Javier, I'll bet you had 2 speeches in your pocket. I didn't mean that in a cynical way, that you could have gone either way, but you were waiting for the final debate. And he said, yeah, that's true, Al. Wonderful man. It was a tough thing, because you know you're going to get cremated, and these guys in Congress should wear a button that says "Save us from ourselves," because they don't want to do the tough votes because they'll get defeated. Somebody called and said, "We're going to use that in my campaign." The boy, I said, "If you do, you're through. You'll be beaten." And some poor guy did, a Democrat. And a Republican said they were for Simpson-Bowles. We don't call it Bowles-Simpson because of the acronym. And we called it. And so they both were defeated.
They both were defeated.
Defeat in a primary.
Which
hot
maybe
stuff,
it
really.
ultimately comes back
Good
to the
stuff.
voters. But
I'm going to shut up now if I can help it.
Governor Sullivan, take us to Ireland. And
I
tell
knew
us-
we'd get to art before
Yeah,
we
there
were
we
done
go.
here.
Yeah, before we were
And
done.
I'm wondering now. I'm wondering now what you brought that ballot for.
Yeah, I was just about to pick it up.
Well, you talk about civility in the peace process. Let me first say, I didn't go to Ireland until after the peace accords had been signed. So to the extent I played a role in the peace accords, it was in trying to keep the parties together after it was signed, and that was a challenge and still is an ongoing challenge. But a couple of things you have to remember. We're talking here about solving problems, and it's one of the things that so distinguishes the U.S. from most other countries. They're dealing with 400 years of incivility and trying to overcome the offenses of that time. And I refer to it as most of Europe is one way or another carrying the cross of history on their shoulders and trying to figure out how do we get around these problems. So when you talk about overcoming problems and civility, we're really just beginning. But the one area of civility that I could come to, because these guys wouldn't even appear in the same room together, even after the accords were signed, until one day we ended up in Washington and stood in the White House where Jerry Adams was on one side and the leaders of the other side were on the other side. And the first time they'd been in the same room. They weren't talking yet, but they came into the same room. But George Mitchell represents the ultimate in civility. He was sent by President Clinton to work with President Clinton, Tony Blair, and the Premier of the Republic of Ireland to try to get these done. And he worked, what was it, Al, 5-6 years. And he did it only by virtue of listening and perseverance and understanding and developing respect and trust. And anybody that knows him or has followed his career would understand there is no anger in that man. He works and he succeeds with total civility.
Well, that's an inspiration that there's someone out there, right, that can
I don't know many people that,
give us
that could
the
have
model.
done that job.
But he was my leader too, you know. He was a Democrat and I was the assistant Republican. Dole was the leader, Cranston on the other side. But George Mitchell told me, and I've been at his forums in his university up at Colby, told me that it was a critical, important time that Mike Sullivan was an integral part of that, of what was eventually resolved after they hadn't even talked to each other.
Well, and listening to him tonight, I don't think any of us are surprised. Well, I'm going to ask one more question, and then we've got some time for audience questions. If you're interested, the microphone is up there, and so you can make your way up there if you're interested. If not, I'm sure we have other material that we can continue to cover.
You got a lot in?
I do have a lot in here. No, I think, and you said it, Senator, the people eventually are responsible because they're the ones that voted out the person you're referring to who was willing to support Erskine Bowles. And so it ultimately comes back to us and what we're willing to accept. And we saw a quote recently that was just a little bit jarring to me, and this might be a little bit generational, but in a forum on civility at Drake University, a student was quoted as saying, "What is campaigning if not entertainment? That's what we thrive in. That's what we're Googling. We love the nonsense. We love the meanness." Is there a concern that we are driving this incivility and that, we might not be so interested in politics if it was back to the good old days and actually civil? What do you think, Senator?
Well, I think that young people look at what's happening today and think people are stupid. And they say, if you have an issue to resolve, like the healthcare system of the U.S. or the solvency of the Social Security system, because right now, all this stuff that's going on about the budget, and look who's the chairman of the budget committee, Mike Enzi from Wyoming, a CPA, doing the best he can. And he has to do it incrementally because they will not follow, they will not come. There hasn't been a budget for 6 years because they don't want to do a budget because they'll get cremated by the groups. But you have to come into the game with the thought, I'm going to do something and I'm going to give it my best effort. And what the hell was your question? I'm going to answer it.
If we are responsible for driving this, we the people.
So the thing that young people look at is that these guys must be stupid, and they don't understand it. They've never understood politics. They hope they can see a fight between the Dems and the Republicans, or Bernie fighting Hillary or Cruz fighting Trump. This is all excitement, and of course every day. And now, as soon as this election is over, you can bet on all the channels it will be. Now, what will happen in 2020? Will Cruz run? Will, honest to God, make you barf. And that's that's what's happening. And no wonder young people look at that and just say, these guys are out of it. And I don't know how you're going to get them back in, but they're going to get back in when they waddle up to the window to get a check on Social Security in 2034 and get a check for 23% less. And that's exactly what they'll get, according to the trustees of the system now, not a bunch of zealots on both sides. That's what you're going to get if you don't make these changes now. There's no way to make changes now because you're going to get hammered flat by every single group. I sleep with a realtor. She has asked me about the home mortgage interest rate. And I just say, no, and you're just go back to sleep. Now, when you get a government that is being ridiculed, let me tell you, there is a tipping point. This is dead serious, because our commission kept asking. Durbin kept asking, where's the tipping point? You know, Crapo from Idaho, where's the tipping point? The tipping point is very simple. It's when the people who've loaned us $20 trillion. Now, I really don't believe the old phrase that the debt doesn't mean anything, because it means something to the people that loan you the money. And if you owe $20 trillion, and they're going to come to us and say, you know, we got you figured out, we love you, you have a dysfunctional government, that's proven, and you're addicted to debt, that's proven, and we want more money for our money. And at that point, inflation will kick up, and interest rates, you think, will stay where they are? Have a drink. They're going to go to 5. They're going to go where they've always gone. Somewhere soon, they're going to go where they've always gone. There's a fiction to believe these things, that it's different this time. So in this atmosphere, and guess what happens? The guy that gets screwed is the little guy, because the money guys will always take care of themselves, and history will relate that right back to the people who rolled up their Rembrandts in the back of a cart and stuck it under a bale of hay.
There you go.
I think that's enough for me right now. Let's go back to sleep.
So, Governor, well, we're going to get... Governor Sullivan, do you see some of the blame, if you will, for incivility falling on our shoulders?
Yes, but I would first say I'm not ready to adopt the comment that you read as indicative of a whole generation. I think whatever the generation Y, X, millennials, whatever they are, there's a lot more substance than that comment. And so I'm not ready to give up hope about the generations. But I believe that we can't see what's happening, and we can't see a government that is getting nothing done. And in part, this is part of it. If government isn't impacting your life in a positive way, then it's easy to become sarcastic and want just a food fight, and that's where we end up. So I would say, yes, we are responsible, because as a populace, we allow it to happen. And what did Pogo say? We found the enemy, and it is us. And that's why I'm hopeful that conversations like this can be helpful.
If you had a young politician seeking your advice on how to proceed in this environment and still be civil, can you think of a way to direct him or her in what you would consider to be a constructive direction?
I would give much the same advice that Al mentioned earlier, is don't let politics drive your goals. Find something, make sure you're good at it, so politics doesn't become the driving force, but then put yourself into campaigns and work with people. But work with people that you can respect and that represent the values that are important. And then if you have the talent and the acumen for it, it'll come.
But if you're just going to spend the day complaining and whining and moaning about the Repubs or the Dems or all this stuff, and that's all you're going to do at the coffee or wherever, just all day long. Go home at night and either watch Rachel or whoever, or pick the one you want. Get Rush, babe, if he's your cup of tea, or Rachel if that's your cup of tea. They'll get you worked up, and then you won't sleep, and then you really be irritated and lash out. And I tell you what I tell them to do: run for the precinct committee man in your district, and get off your butt and take part or get taken apart. Now, it's that simple. And they'll say, well, what's that? Well, go in and try it and see what it is. And the reason I got into it was that I didn't know who our precinct committee person was, a woman. I just voted for her, nobody else. Then I went to a meeting. And she got up and her first resolution was, the sole purpose of marriage is for procreation. I waited a while.
Oh, right. We're not going to believe that, are we?
A slow civil period.
Bring on.
And then I got up and I said, if any of you really believe this, you're missing a lot of fun. And she went, oh. I went over to Ann and said, oh, you must live with a pig there. But honestly, I mean, if people are going to be as goofy as that, I mean, you got to get in the game. Or get rid of the 16th Amendment. Well, that's the income tax amendment. Now, I said, how do you replace that? He didn't even have the brains to say a VAT tax could do that. That would be something to think about. No, just get rid of it. And put the capital in Shoshone, because it's in the real center of the state. And if you heard that in your meetings, you'd want to go run for something.
You agree, Governor Sullivan?
With Shoshone being the capital.
Yeah, there you go, no.
It'll be a great economic development project.
It was.
Except for that gas station.
Oh, well, I don't see anybody lining up at the microphone. I'm a little bit surprised. Anybody have desire? Or
Don't encourage him.
don't encourage them. There's nothing left to be said, I think. Certainly. If I can hear you from up there, go ahead. No, there isn't. Just yell. Okay, balance in the press coverage of, and I don't know the specifics about the fairness doctrine, but I believe that most of the even-handedness, and I want these two to answer it, probably came in part from the press saying themselves that they were supposed to be objective, and that has certainly changed. So I'm not sure it's fair to grill you on a statute, but is there some way to legislate fairness in the press? That is probably an easy answer.
This is a federal issue,
That's
right?
a federal issue.
That's right. That's very good, Mike. You know, that's true. Well, you're messing with the First Amendment, and that's not a good place to be. You know, you may not like it, but it was Jackson who spoke, and now I remember what amendment he was speaking on. It was about the First Amendment, that it is not a suicide pact. And, you know, you just have to understand that the people that are feeding you that crap day and night couldn't administer their way out of a paper bag.
Yeah.
They are entertainers. That's all they are. They couldn't get into a deep issue of what happened at the hearing on that issue 2 years ago, or what happened with the transcript on that issue. They can't even tell you. They don't even know what it is. And they're there getting paid $2.5 million or $4 million or $5 million just to get you worked up. And they are entertainers, and you must list them as entertainers, not people to give you any kind of knowledge or wisdom, especially wisdom.
Remember, he's now talking about the newscasters,
I am.
not politicians.
Both. No, but wisdom is lost in America. Everybody has knowledge. You guys all day long with knowledge, but damn few people with wisdom, and fewer people with common sense. Where is your filter? Where's the filter you were trained on from high school or grade school, where you knew the difference between stupidity and knowledge and learning? Good grief. I hear this goofiest things people say. How about this? I think, how can this guy have even bought into that? So as long as you're into that and not sleeping, you just really need to turn the knob and go outside and run around and grab a can of beer and a chick and...
Stop, Al.
Stop, Al. Okay, Al. Governor Sullivan, save us.
No, I think the horse is out of the barn as far as the fairness doctrine is concerned. It's an issue, but I think it has more to do with the intelligence of the populace than it does with the validity of regulation or non-regulation.
Any other? Yes, right in the middle. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, somebody's at the mic. I'm sorry, I didn't
Gary.
see that. Is it Gary?
Gary.
Hi,
Would you please say your name and then?
my name's Gary Trauner,
Thank you.
and I'm happy to be here with Senator Simpson and Justice Kite and Governor Sullivan. The only difference between them and me is that I never won yet, but I'll get there one of these days. But I do have a question that I think is super important. I want to take it all the way back to the beginning of a conversation to something that Governor Sullivan said about the fragility of democracy. Democracy's hard. We all know that. Half the time, roughly, you're voting for people that don't win, or you're being governed by people that you don't like. And the only way it works is if we have a willingness as a group of people to accept that and to move forward. And that means that maybe a Democrat is appointing the next Supreme Court justice. Maybe it's a Republican. We're in an age, I think, right now where there are a significant percentage of the population that is not accepting the legitimacy and the norms that we need to live by in our politics. And I'd like to have both of you maybe speak to how do we get, because if we violate our norms, if we don't accept the legitimacy of an elected official, what's the mechanism to remedy that? There really is no mechanism short of eventual revolution or something else. So how do we get back to accepting the legitimacy of people that we don't agree with?
Governor?
What was the nature of this? Is it possible?
Yeah, that's our title.
Civility, is it possible? Gary? I think it's possible because I still believe in the good of America. But it has to start with the leadership. And if Congress or legislators aren't leading, it's going to be very difficult without revolution to have the populace come up, except through their vote. And it's this kind of a discussion, it seems to me, that if young people, people who are distrustful now of government, which is one of the major issues, because government isn't listening except to fine zones of opinion, in part dependent upon contributions to their candidacies. And until we can reach the point where we can cross that bridge and say, look, we've got to have leadership that is fair and balanced and civil, we're going to continue to have these discussions and be frustrated.
Senator?
Well, in my own situation, and I do cross the line between good humor and smart ass. I know that. I do that. And it's not always attractive. But humor is the only thing that keeps me sane, because you can't hate politicians and love democracy. That's what it is. I hate politicians. I hear that all the time. Well, great. Then you hate democracy. No, wait a minute. I love democracy. I just hate politicians. Forget it. There's no division there. You can't do it. And then, hate. I talked about hate and trust, and those things are gone or ruptured. But I guess the cynicism of it all doesn't start at Congress, doesn't start with us. It starts in the city council chamber and the county commissioner's chamber and the mayor's chamber and the Little League ballpark. It didn't start in Washington, D.C., this incivility. It started way back when the cheerleader's mother shot the other one because she didn't get the cheerleader costume in Dallas, Texas, or the Friday night football game. Get back to the root. And as I say, hatred corrodes the container it's carried in, and then don't forget political correctness. That's like wearing duct tape over your mouth. Because if you are a person that has hate and prejudice and bias and pretend that you're just goody-goody two-shoes, you're kidding yourself. And it's going to come up like a fissure in the side of a volcano. You can't keep it down. Say, well, I've never been politically incorrect. Give me a break. I taught at Harvard, and I said, any of you enamored by political correctness, get out. And nobody left. And we talked about the troubles in Ireland and Armenian genocide and abortion and gays and lesbians and the real things of life, without shading them with, I never had a bad thought like that. Forget it. As I say, it's a fake, it's phony, and it'll blow you up and eat you. And there's a lot of that going on. I think half the hostility in the world is caused by people who say, I don't believe I've ever had an evil thought.
So that isn't a simple answer, Gary, wherever you went, but it's an answer nonetheless.
Another one I didn't answer, but I got a lot off my
Yeah, there you go. We have one other at the microphone.
Thank you. I'm Natalie Macker, and I have the honor of serving as a county commissioner here in Teton County. Thank you.
County Commissioner.
And I'm wondering if you think increasing diversity in our elected bodies would improve or diminish our ability to be civil.
Interesting.
Diversity?
Diversity. Governor?
I'll answer that question, yes.
There you go.
I don't hear well, I'm sorry. I had a mortar platoon in the Army, and this damn thing just went beep.
So would
increase-
increasing diversity in our elected officials help us to be more civil?
Well, yeah. how can you argue that one?
There you go. There's your answer. Good question.
Hi, I'm Story Clark. I have a question. Can you, each of you, give one example of what you would recommend happening that's realistic, that could move us towards civility? So realistic measures that actually could be enacted, that each of you would recommend, that would move us closer to being a more civil society.
You mean enacted in terms of legislation?
Well,
Or-
just today, what would you
Okay.
guys do if you could do one thing that actually could be done? Not change the Supreme Court ruling, but something that could be successfully achieved. What would be the one thing that each of you would try to do?
Governor?
Well, it's Story, in this quick second, the one thing that occurs to me, and it goes back to some of what Al said before, I think Harvard at one time put on a program at the beginning of every congressional session where they brought all of the newly elected officials together and had a 3-day discussion. It wasn't a discussion to try to convince them of policy, but talking about process and getting to know each other. And I think in some way, if you could expand that in every institutional setting that we have elected officials, where they are getting together and knowing each other as people, as distinguished from their ideological preferences. As Al said, with Congress, that's the way it used to be. They stayed in Washington and they got to know each other and each other's families. And that, in my view, is the best way to become more civil, because if you know somebody, you're not going to lack civility in your relationship. Well, there are probably a few that you would.
Senator?
At Harvard, when I chaired I was the director of the Institute of Politics, and when I got there, I think a very conservative person was in the forum. I think it was Reed, I can't remember, but I was there, and here I'm the director. I don't know what the hell is going on, but I'm the director. And they booed during his remarks. And I watched that and didn't say anything his first night. And then the next time they had someone as volatile as, say, McNamara. And a woman said, "You killed my son." That'll get you started in civility. And I remember then I got up. It was automatic. I got up and I said, "Wait a minute. I just got here. I want to tell you all, you're privileged people. You're at Harvard. You're very privileged people. Spoiled people, maybe. And some of you on scholarships, and your old man was an immigrant or whatever. But we're not going to have any sound at all out of somebody when they're speaking. And when they're through and start asking questions, you can hoot and stomp and jump around all you want and have a lot of fun. But there'll be no more of that. None. And boy, I tell you, there wasn't. And then when they'd peep up, I'd say, "Knock it off or get out." And that didn't have anything to do with things, but it does have to do with the fact that we did have a new members course at Harvard. And the newly elected members we invited, and I was the director.
Members of Congress?
Newly elected members of Congress, but the Heritage Center said to the Republicans, don't go to Harvard. You don't want to go to Harvard for a meeting on new members because they'll rub your brain wrong. So the Heritage Society, they have new member conference, and I was active with that with Ed Fellner, good guy. And so they said down there, don't go to the Heritage new members because they're all right-wing kooks down there. So Ed and I got together and had them joint, where we brought in the purists, don't go over to Harvard, don't go to the Heritage. I mean, this is what's happening. This is what, not happening, it goes on every day. And so We did the new members course, and it was great. I don't know if they still do it, but they did it.
So that would be your solution, which I think if we could control
Yes,
that.
yes, you could, but let me tell you, you need to hear this clearly. The train has left the station. There is absolutely nothing that could be suggested or usable or heard until after November 8th. And after this campaign, brothers and sisters, you're going to hear a lot about it. And we're going to do something about it, because it can't go on. And there's already groups forming saying, wait till after November 8th or whatever it is, and we'll start putting America back together again.
Oh, thank you.
You didn't drink your
Well,
water.
I think we have reached our time limit. We could certainly go on all evening.
Haven't we done so?
And
already?
haven't we done so? I think, I hope I can speak for all of you, that we really are privileged to have these two statesmen here to share their experiences with us, and I think they certainly make me proud. I hope they make you all proud that we have this in Wyoming.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You were great.
Now, we're way out, losing things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very
Mike
much.
up there?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice, isn't it?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We've got a guy to close it here. We have closing comments. I can't see Mike. Is he here? To my left. Oh, here he comes. Has he got a microphone? Good.
Thank you.
This is Mike Reed.
Mike Eden, hello.
Excuse me.
Is this working? First of all, I just want to say thank you so much. What a wonderful evening. My name is Mike Eden. I'm the president of the board of Interconnections 21. And I just want to thank all of you for coming tonight. Hope you've enjoyed tonight's program. A special thank you to our friends at the Wyoming Humanities Council who have been a supporter of IC21 since 2008. Their mission to expand Wyoming's horizons through critical and creative thinking dovetails perfectly with IC21's mission to provide opportunities for high school students and our community to learn about critical world issues. Thank you to Shannon Smith, Executive Director, Emmy DeGrappa, the Western Regional Director, and to Shelby Reed, the Executive Director of IC21. Those three have done so much, and I just want to ask the board members of the Wyoming Humanities Council and IC21 to just raise your hand so we can acknowledge you, and thank you for all of your work. We're also very proud of our partnership with Wyoming PBS and are grateful for that they're here tonight to broadcast this to folks all over the state. Lastly, we'd like to give special thanks to Rob and Celia Wallace, Peter and Carol Coxhead, John and Susan Jackson, Jarate Kazikis and Roger Altman, the Hamlin Family Foundation, and the Wolfenson Family Foundation, who all helped make this possible tonight. Thank you so much for being here, and have a great evening.